The Adidas Adizero SL2 and the Puma Velocity Nitro 3, two shoes that share a bunch of similarities. However, there are some key differences, and those key differences will probably determine which one of these shoes is right for you. I've run in Adidas shoes for a long time. Pre-Boost era, I've been running in Adidas. However, this Puma Velocity Nitro 3 was the first Puma running shoe and first Puma shoe I've ever bought. And when I first ran in this shoe, I was actually shocked how much this shoe reminded me of something made by this company, Adidas, to the point where I commented in my initial impressions video, link in the description, that if you would have somehow blindfolded me and told me to go for a run in this shoe and not told me the brand, I would have told you this was an Adidas shoe because it shared a lot of the same feel, a lot of the same properties, and a lot of the same break-in that I'm very familiar with Adidas. And these two companies have an interesting joined history. They're basically neighbors across the street from each other in the same town in Germany. And it's just really interesting how two teams got to essentially the same shoe, but in very different ways with some different design philosophies. Since this is one of my versus videos, let's start with the specs. Starting with the Adizero SL2, we have 36 millifoam in the heel, 27 millifoam in the forefoot, giving you a 9 mil drop. The shoe weighs 8.4 ounces or 238 grams. Moving to the Puma Velocity Nitro 3, we have 36 millifoam in the heel, 26 millifoam in the forefoot, giving you a 10 mil drop, and the shoe weighs 9.5 ounces or 268 grams. These specs are for the standard US men's size 9 reference size that everyone uses. Now on foot, I'm going to say that the drop in the Adizero SL2, because of the more compressive foam in that shoe, feels probably closer to 6 mil. It does not feel like a 9 mil drop. Whereas the drop in the Puma Velocity Nitro 3 does feel more, but I'm also going to say it doesn't quite feel like 10 mil. I would say that's probably closer to 8 or 9. You definitely feel the taller heel in that shoe, but it does not feel extreme. The other key difference is the Puma Velocity Nitro 3 is much heavier on foot, and you do notice that, but that really just shows you how lightweight and how performance oriented the Adizero SL2 is, because at 8.4 ounces or 238 grams, it's a very, very stripped down lightweight trainer. Looking at the midsoles of these two shoes, the Adizero SL2 uses Lightstrike 2.0 as the primary foam of the shoe with a heel to forefoot Lightstrike Pro core. Now, Lightstrike 2.0 is just a EVA foam. It's the same foam that was found in the Boston 12 and Adios 8 last year. People are saying that it's softer. I don't think it's necessarily any softer, but I do think it's more airy and more flexible, so it does feel more natural on the foot. But all the performance characteristics of the Adizero SL2 are coming from Lightstrike Pro, that core that goes from heel to forefoot, because Lightstrike Pro is Adidas's premier racing foam, and that's what gives this shoe its performance characteristics. The Adizero SL2 is a very neutral shoe, and I'll talk more about that a little bit later in this video. And I would call it a cushioned ride. It's not overly soft, but it's definitely not firm. It's a very flexible, very cushioned ride, and it feels great. And it's very, very versatile in that sense for road running. It has a mild forefoot rocker, but honestly, because the shoe is so flexible, you don't necessarily feel that. Though on the lateral side, there is a heel to toe rocker. You do feel that a little bit more, but overall, it's just a very performance-oriented, very flexible, very natural feel on foot. With the Puma Velocity Nitro 3, you have directly under the foot from heel to toe Puma's Nitro foam, and the Nitro foam that's in this shoe is the supercritical TPEE foam, which again, supercritical TPEE is the same as what Lightstrike Pro is. So the Nitro foam in the Velocity Nitro 3 and the Lightstrike Pro foam in the Adizero SL2 are technically the same foam, though the energy return or resiliency of the Lightstrike Pro in the Adizero SL2 is much higher, so the energy return is higher, where the Nitro foam in the Velocity Nitro 3 is much more tuned for, I think, stability and durability because it is a trainer. So while the Velocity Nitro 3 definitely is very performance oriented and that Nitro foam is very nice underfoot, it does have an EVA carrier below it that runs heel to toe that sort of tones down the shoe and makes it a little less aggressive, a little less performance oriented, and makes it more of a trainer. And you do feel that the ride of the Velocity Nitro 3 is much firmer because of the construction of the midsole. And as I said, it's a firm and stable ride, and it has a very mild forefoot rocker, though I would actually consider the geometry of the Velocity Nitro 3 to be very traditional. While there is a forefoot rocker there, it's not overly aggressive, and the shoe runs in a fairly traditional feel. Looking at the weights of the two pairs of these shoes that I actually own, with the Adizero SL2, we have 234 grams on the left, 235 grams on the right, coming in under the spec'd weight. And again, I think that speaks to the build quality of the Adizero SL2. In the Puma Velocity Nitro 3, on the left, we have 263 grams. On the right, we have 264 grams. Again, a 1 gram difference under the spec coming from the manufacturer, which again speaks to the build quality of the shoe. And I will actually point out that the build quality of the Puma Velocity Nitro 3 is actually outstanding. The fit finish of this shoe, all the materials, and just the way the shoe feels in hand is excellent. So both these shoes are very well made, and they are going to last quite a long time. Moving to the outsoles and the contact patch of both these shoes, I'm going to say that both these shoes have excellent full rubber outsoles, which to me is a requirement for any type of daily trainer. Starting with the Adizero SL2, we have 11.4 centimeters at the widest point in the forefoot, 7.2 centimeters in the waist of the shoe, and 8 centimeters even in the heel. With the Puma Velocity Nitro 3, we have 10.4 centimeters in the widest point in the forefoot, 6.5 centimeters in the waist of the shoe, and 8.4 centimeters in the heel of the shoe. Now, the key difference here is that the Puma Velocity Nitro 3 feels like a slightly longer shoe. It's narrower, and you do notice that. It is a little bit more nimble, but I think because it has a straighter outsole, there's, again, that they're much more even from forefoot to heel. This shoe just feels like it's a little bit longer, and I think this is one of the things that contributes to that longer feel of the shoe. It isn't much longer than the Adizero SL2. It just feels that way on foot, and I think this outsole geometry is really a big case of that. And moving to the Adizero SL2, that wider forefoot and that bigger contact patch of rubber in the forefoot definitely gives this shoe a much more anchored feel, especially for forefoot strikers. But that narrower waist and heel is, I think, the problem for midfoot and heel strikers, especially those who pronate. As you can see on the medial side in the waist and that rail that's on the forefoot, the black piece of rubber, there's not a lot of material over there, and there's not a lot of support over there. So this shoe will definitely cave in for runners who pronate, especially midfoot and heel strikers, and I'll talk more about that a bit later in this video. And looking at the rubber coverage of both these shoes, as I said, they both have nearly full rubber coverage, which to me, again, is a requirement for a daily trainer. The Adizero SL2 is not using Continental rubber, it's using Adiwear rubber, which I'm finding to be extremely grippy and extremely durable. And it's a great road running outsole material. In fact, you can hear it tearing into the asphalt sometimes, especially on downhills. So this is going to be a great road outsole, and it will handle dirt roads and it will handle gravel roads just fine. But as you see in the forefoot, there's 3 sort of cutouts where you can see the Lightstrike Pro core, and in the heel there's one. In anything that's muddy, including trail running, those are going to fill with mud instantly, and they're going to compress that mud because they're in really high force areas, and you're definitely going to feel those poking in your foot. That's why I don't think this is a great outsole for anything other than road running. Where with the Puma Velocity Nitro 3, the firmness of the foam, but then this Puma grip outsole is outstanding for really any surface, but it really excels on dirt roads, trail, track, wet roads. It just grips everywhere, and there's a reason why people really love Puma grip, and this shoe does exceptionally well on any surface. Let's start with the fit and feel of these two shoes, and this is where the differences really start. Looking at the Adizero SL2, this is a very stripped down performance trainer, and it has a very Adizero upper, which means it's not the most conforming to the foot, but for an Adizero upper, the upper on the shoe is actually pretty good, pretty soft on the foot, and it's one of the best training uppers that Adidas has put on an Adizero shoe in years. But the fit of this shoe is definitely more on the performance side. It's a more snug fit. I'm not going to call it a race fit, but it's not really a training fit. It's somewhere in between. Whereas with the Puma Velocity Nitro 3, This has a very accommodating and soft and plush training upper. You definitely get a very training feel on foot in the shoe, though the lockdown is very good, so it doesn't really cause any issues. But this is definitely the much more performance-oriented fit, where this is the much more training-oriented fit. Another key thing that distinguishes the fit of these two shoes is sizing. Now, I went true to size with both of these shoes, so they're both US men's size 9. And that's typically what I wear for every running shoe, Adidas or Puma. However, my US men's size 9 foot is on the smaller size of that size, so sometimes I can get away with a US men's size 8.5. Now, the Adizero SL2 fits nearly perfectly. Again, this is a performance-oriented trainer. The fit is definitely performance-oriented, and I would actually describe the length of the shoe is nearly perfect for my foot. Where with the Puma Velocity Nitro 3, this has always been what I would call a very long shoe. And I talked about this in the specs, where the shoe is actually longer and narrower. And I would say in the fit, you definitely do notice that with this shoe. So the more accommodating trainer upper with the slightly longer fit means if your foot is maybe a little bit on the larger size of your size, you probably need to size up half a size in this shoe. But in this shoe, you can probably get away with it because there's just a little bit more length to this shoe. And that also distinguishes how these two shoes fit. And lastly, let's talk about the width of these two shoes. Now, a lot of people consider both of these shoes very narrow, but starting with the Adizero SL2, I don't actually consider this an overly narrow shoe. It's definitely more narrow than the Adios Pro 3 or the Adios 8 or even the Boston 12 from last year, but for my foot, which I've described many times as neither wide nor narrow, but is high volume, this shoe doesn't fit me overly narrow. However, with the Puma Velocity Nitro 3, I would consider this a very narrow shoe. Though that borderline is sort of right between these two shoes, because this is barely on that narrow shoe range for me, and this is barely almost not a wide shoe for me. So that line is sort of directly between these two shoes. Now, as of the recording of this video at the end of June of 2024, this shoe is fairly new, the Adizero SL2, so there isn't a wide version available of this yet, but there will be. And there is a wide version of the Puma Velocity Nitro 3 available, though finding it is a little spotty. So I would say if you have even a remotely wide shoe, you're going to want a wide version of either one of these. If your foot is just a little bit over a standard width, you're probably going to be totally fine in this shoe, and you may be okay in this shoe because the training upper on here, that's much more generous, much more forgiving to the foot, is probably going to accommodate that extra width a little bit. But again, this is the narrower of the two. So I would recommend a wide shoe if you have a wide foot for either one of these, and really hold out till you can find the wide model for either one. Moving to the ride of these two shoes, a lot of the ride characteristics start with the midsoles. And as I talked about in the specs section, the midsoles are actually very similar from a material standpoint. They both have an EVA carrier foam, and they both have a supercritical TPEE performance layer. In the Adizero SL2, that's the Lightstrike Pro Core that's from heel to forefoot. And in the Puma Velocity Nitro 3, that's the Nitro foam that runs heel to toe right below the foot. Now, the Puma Nitro foam isn't always a supercritical TPEE foam, but it is in this shoe. Other models will have different chemistries and different properties, but in this shoe, the two performance foams are very similar. I'm going to say that Lightstrike Pro foam has much better resiliency. There's much more energy return to Lightstrike Pro than there is for Nitro foam, the TPEE version of it. And that kind of makes sense because this is Adidas's Premier Racing foam, where this is kind of now Puma's training foam. But you get a very dynamic ride and you get decent energy return out of both of these, though the Adizero SL2 gives you much better energy return because of the properties of Lightstrike Pro. So this is definitely the more aggressive and responsive shoe between the two of these. But the characteristics of the ride of both these shoes also are determined by the construction of the midsoles. On the Adizero SL2, we have a core of Lightstrike Pro that again runs from heel to forefoot, surrounded almost completely by a carrier foam of Lightstrike foam, which is Adidas's EVA foam. And the Lightstrike foam in this shoe is much more airy and flexible, making this a much more cushioned ride. I'm not going to say it's softer, it's just more cushioned and flexible. It feels more natural to run in this shoe. Whereas in the Puma Velocity Nitro 3, you have the nitro foam that runs from heel to forefoot directly under the foot, and below that is the carrier foam of Puma's EVA that also runs from heel to toe. However, Puma's EVA carrier foam is much stiffer, much less flexible, does require quite a bit of break-in to get this shoe to be somewhat flexible. I would say 40 to 50K at least, where this one's probably taking me about 20 to 30K to break in. And that's typical of a TPE foam as well. But the EVA carrier foam in this shoe is much stiffer, and it mutes the performance of the nitro foam down quite a bit. And the nitro foam in this shoe also has a lower resiliency, so the energy return of this shoe is less. But in a training context, I think that actually makes this shoe a little bit more versatile for more things than just road running, where this shoe is really, really tuned for performance road running. It's almost a race shoe with a training upper that's really tuned for performance running, really making this a performance trainer, where this shoe is definitely has performance. However, this is more of an all-arounder trainer. And the last real ride difference between these two shoes comes down to, I think, the design philosophy for the creation of each one of these shoes. As I've said multiple times in this video, this is a performance trainer. This is a stripped down, almost race shoe with a training upper that's meant for performance training, where this is more of that generous all-around daily trainer all-rounder shoe with a very comfortable, very plush upper on it. But one of the things that will primarily set these two apart is they're both very neutral shoes, meaning if you pronate at all, even if you have very mild pronation, you should just forget that this shoe exists, because for a midfoot or heel striker who pronates, this is going to make your pronation overpronation. There's almost no support on the medial side in the midfoot or heel of this shoe, and it's just going to allow your shoe to cave in. As a pronator, I would not recommend this shoe at all, and like I said, forget this shoe exists. If you're a forefoot striker who pronates, you may be okay with this because you have such a good, big, flat anchored forefoot in this shoe, but I still would be a little leery of it, and it would have to require some trial and error. The other problem with this shoe for someone who is pronating is that there's a glued-on insole in this shoe. As I said, this shoe is really built like a race shoe, but it's a trainer. So you can't put a custom insole or an orthotic in this shoe. Even if you remove the glued-in insole on this shoe and you did it right with a heat gun, you still are going to damage the shoe. And even then, the shoe's not designed to accommodate a removable insole, so the insole is never going to fit right in the shoe. So it's just not going to feel right. So this is not your shoe if you pronate, especially if you're a midfoot or heel striker. Where with the Puma Velocity Nitro 3, for whatever reason, and I talked about this in my initial impressions, this shoe has an inward or medial bias to it. It just, you can see it really from the heel. It always just feels like it's designed and leaning in. Now, as a forefoot striker who supinates, so I'm landing on the outside of my foot, that works really well for me. And there is a lot of material on the medial, midfoot, and heel of this shoe to support the shoe. It's just this shoe has a bias that leans inward. So if you pronate, this may be something that you may be okay with, but it also may cause problems. But this shoe does have a removable insole, so you could put a orthotic or custom insole in this shoe if it's low volume. If it's a high volume insole or orthotic, there's just not enough room in this shoe, and it is, again, a fairly narrow shoe. I don't think you're going to get away with it, but that is something that's going to distinguish the use case of this shoe for a lot of people, is that both of these are not great for pronators, but this one really is not. And this one, you can probably work around it because, again, it has a removable insole. So what's the verdict here? Which one of these two shoes do I prefer? Well, I'm going to say of all the Versus videos I've done on this channel, this one is probably the closest one I've ever done. But I definitely do have a favorite, and that favorite is the Adidas Adizero SL2, because this is just the much more performance-oriented trainer, the much more stripped down, almost a race shoe with a trainer upper shoe built for performance running and training. And for a trainer that's an all-arounder as a road runner, that's really what I'm looking for. This shoe is one that I can take and do easy running through tempo threshold, workouts beyond 5K pace, and even for a 5K, I would maybe take this out to race in, especially if I wasn't going for a PR. It's just an all-around versatile shoe, really optimized for road running, and that's excellent. It's really quite a unique trainer that's really performance driven. Therefore, it's really an Adizero trainer. And I love that. It's great, and it makes perfect sense with the rest of the Adizero lineup. But that's not to say this shoe doesn't have a lot of performance for road running and training. It really does. This shoe is outstanding as a trainer for road running. But where this shoe differs is I think this is much more of an all-rounder, where the Adizero SL2 is really tuned for performance as a performance trainer in road running. This is the kind of shoe that you can literally bring anywhere and it's going to perform extremely well. So for road running, this does an excellent job. For a track workout, if you're a road runner who wants a shoe to be able to bring to the track and do track workouts and you don't want to use a track spike or a specific flat for the track, this is a great option. I think the firmness of the platform and the Puma grip outsole and how this grips the road is excellent on the track. I like a firmer shoe on the track because I can dig into the softer track. This is excellent for that. If you're a road runner who occasionally goes onto trails, and I'm talking about more than just a dirt or gravel road, which honestly this shoe is going to do really well in, and the Adizero SL2 will do just fine on dirt roads or gravel roads. But if you want to journey into the trails, I think this is probably one of the best, if not the best, road to trail shoe that's out there on the market right now. A lot of people talk about the Nike Peg Trail as being the best road to trail. Well, this is a much better shoe for road running than the Peg Trail is, and it's just as good, if not better, on most trail running than the Peg Trail. Even for moderately technical trail running, this shoe is going to do just fine. Again, the firmness of the platform is going to protect you from rocks, which is something you need for somewhat technical trail running. And this Puma grip outsole and the grid pattern of this shoe is excellent, surprisingly good for trail running. So this is an extremely versatile trainer that has a ton of performance for road, track, and trail, and I think making it probably the best all-rounder that is on the market right now. You really cannot go wrong with either one of these shoes. If you're looking for the more performance-oriented road-first trainer, Adizero SL2. This is my preference because I need a shoe for performance road running. If you're looking for that just performance all-arounder that will work on road, track, and trail, this is going to be your option. If you need a custom orthotic or an insole, this is also going to be the only option because this has a non-removable insole and it's not going to work for you. But again, these are amazing shoes that bring a lot of technology and a lot of performance for a very, very small cost, and you're not going to go wrong with either one of these. Thank you for making it to the end of the video. If you find this content useful, consider subscribing. You'll see more content from me pop up in your feed. If not, drop a like on this video because it helps this channel continue to grow, which I always appreciate. And with that, I'll catch you in the next one.